Make a start with a little bit of an intro and people can join in while I'm doing that. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so as you all know, this is part of the Creative Bravery Festival, a festival designed to rethink and reimagine education. And this is the walking classroom. And I'm joined by my co-hosts that you've just been meeting there, Maggie O'Neill and Jerry O'Neill, who will introduce themselves shortly. But I think that we've become really conscious during the sort of lockdown period and COVID of the change in education and the dominance of online learning, and a kind of dialogue that's set up that, you know, positions online versus classroom-based learning. And we want to do something about walking and the outdoor, the potentials for a sort of outdoor classroom, a walking classroom, and, you know, bringing that into the core of learning. So today's really kind of an exploration around that, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. So there's plenty of resources in the tool shed. If you go into the tool shed and under documents, there's a whole folder about walking. So a lot of things that we'll be talking about today will be in the tool shed for you to see later. We also have morning cafes at 8 o'clock every day and an evening cafe at 8. So if there's anything that's been we've been chatting about today that you want to chat further, we're asking people to sort of drop into the cafe sessions and have a bit more of a chance to speak about it informally. And there's also the ideas playground. So we're asking everybody after the session to go out and stick up an idea or a thought in the ideas playground. So we'll collect all these and we'll be able to share them at the end of the festival. Okay. So for those that don't know me, I'm Karen Lawson. I work in the Scottish Government and I work in the team that is about collective leadership and about transformational change across the sort of tackling some of the big issues that face us in society. And of course, education is one of those. And so we're trying to refocus in the Creative Bravery Festival around rethinking education. And it was really fortunate that, you know, I've come to know Jerry and Maggie, and we kind of thought we'd put together something that was around what is the role of walking in that transformational journey. So we know that Scotland and indeed Ireland, I think Jerry tweeted something out today about an outdoor classroom in Ireland. So there's a growing interest in education, but generally at younger people, it's kind of thought about that's a really good for young people to do, but we're really interested in, well, what does that mean for everybody in education or learning, or the way that we have organizations, that we learn in organizations and develop organizations. So it's not limited to a narrow view of education, it's much broader than that. We'll be doing lots of different things, but this is really a kind of conversation and we really want you to be involved in that. So we'll be talking a bit, chances to break out into rooms, but really we're kind of hoping that you will join in this conversation with us. So welcome, and I'm going to pass over to Maggie to introduce herself.
Thanks, Karen. Well, it's really lovely to be here, and it's probably the highlight of my week. So I'm a sociologist, criminologist, and I suppose I was inspired to use walking in my research and teaching through my connection with walking artists, and a commitment really around, for me, the transformative role of art and creativity, and so yeah, that's me. Thank you.
For those of you who are disappointed, like, Maggie is really gonna, we're talking a bit about how we might in these spaces make them more participative, and Maggie is going to kind of listen deeply to our conversations, and I think at the end reflect, kind of bringing in her own deep knowledge of walking and as well. So we'll be hearing a lot more from Maggie later on, in case people have just come here to hear Maggie and saying, is that all she's going to say? there'll be more from Maggie later on. But we are, I mean, my name's Jerry, Jerry O'Neill, no relation as far as I know to Maggie, but I suppose I call myself an adult educator. I trained as a secondary school teacher in Belfast, worked as a further education lecturer with Karen in Edinburgh, Scotland for a number of years, and now work in a university in Kildare in Ireland. Yeah, I mean, that's really all you need to know about me. I just really want to kind of set up what we're kind of doing. So we are trying to kind of, in some ways, talk about how walking and outdoor can be kind of used and explored in education, but we're trying to kind of model it as well. And it's kind of difficult when you're given an hour on Zoom to how to do that. So in some ways, we want you to think of this moment that we're together as the beginning of something that has the potential to be extend beyond this hour that we have together, and that we're not sure where it might end, and we'll talk more about that. But we've kind of created a kind of digital artifact where we might capture some of our thoughts that are emerging for us as we're here together today. So it's a kind of open-ended, slow kind of learning process that we're also kind of all interested, I think, as well. And there's three kind of aspects of walking that we're supposed going to explore here, but we're almost rehearsing for people to go off and explore, and we may come back together again, who knows, at another time to see what we're finding out. But we want to talk a little bit about place. We want to talk about the processes of walking, and particularly then, you know, a provocation that we might set and ask ourselves, and we'll come back to that. But just to get it started, I mean, we're very interested in working in participative ways, and we try to do that as much. We're going to just set people up into small groups of 3 now, and the magic of Verena is going to do that for us, so don't worry about that. You're going to very soon end up in a smaller space with 2 other people, so there'll be 3 of you together, and we'll join that space as well. And just in that space, just come back to that notion of place. What we would like you to focus and talk about, it's really just to introduce yourselves to each other and make connections. But what we'd like you to do is to introduce yourself really by saying, if you could invite the other people on a walk somewhere, where would you invite them? You know, just so in that kind of sense, how that's the kind of notion of place. If you had to invite people on a place to bring them for a walk, you know, where would that be? And that, you know, and why, I suppose. Now, you only have, I think, 5 minutes or so in that space to do that. So it's not a prolonged kind of conversation, and we'll come back after that. And then we'll get into a bit of discussion about that, but then we'll go into a deeper kind of maybe questioning around process and provocation.
I know, we know that was really quick.
Yeah, it was.
It was a very quick walk. It was a speed walking. What we'd be really keen to do, though, is for you to write up in the chat a little bit about reflection on what you heard from somebody else's walk, just right there. And if anyone wants to say anything about what they heard, or what they were curious about, that would be great. If anybody wants to share anything, that would be great. But please do write up in the chat anything that you heard that was interesting. Where were you invited to go to? Sri Lanka, Scotland, Dublin.
Well, Karen, Heather and Rona, who joined me in Breakout 3, Heather's was Bute Island, next to Arran, on the south side, up a hill towards St. Blaine's, with just incredible landscape, incredible views. And for Rona, it would be Gartmore Dam, I hope I've pronounced that properly, with a mix of landscapes, the history in terms of the cotton trade, and lots of sort of an industrial landscape, or a post-industrial landscape.
Sounds lovely. You actually managed to cover quite a lot there then. Any other kind of reflections about where and maybe why?
I guess it's something you want to share that might otherwise be quite a private thing, perhaps.
Yeah.
I know my walk, I've had a lot of very significant experiences there. My mum's ashes are scattered up there and so on.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a sense of it being a special thing, I guess, that you're sharing, something quite personal.
Great. Lots here. Lisa's urban walk through Dublin.
Yeah, I mean, I think we didn't, sorry, I don't think we had enough time really to get even into the why and that. I think we had just time barely as people were dropping into to get a sense of where, you know. Maybe we can pick up a little bit on the why in the next part, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just really wanted to give you a chance to meet somebody else and feel part of the walk. So Jerry, do you want to take us on to the next bit?
Yeah, so I suppose that's I suppose what I'm getting to now, you know, and maybe even I'm just, you know, we can give people a bit more time, even a minute or two. I don't know if that's possible, just to get into that, but maybe we can take up on the why. But so I suppose we have a sense of place, and even in that minute, we had a sense of, it was just amazing in some ways to be sitting in a caravan in Wicklow as I am, and suddenly I'm talking to somebody in Sri Lanka and Scotland and Western Australia. I mean, that is one of the good parts of this kind of technology, I suppose. So I suppose in the second part, we kind of want to dig a little bit deeper into that. We have two questions, I suppose, around that, you know, that are kind of get more into that. And I suppose we could start off really, and you're probably thrown into a different group, but I suppose the provocation really is about the why of walking, but it is, we have a specific question that we'd like you to talk that will address the why. And it's really about what are we doing and what can we be doing and what should we be doing with walking to kind of disrupt, if you like, is the way we're talking about, creatively disrupt education in various spaces. So I suppose that's our kind of provocative question that gets a bit to the why. So what are we doing? So people might have examples. What can we be doing, or what should we be doing that with walking to kind of creatively, but to kind of critically disrupt education is the thing that we'd like to talk about in the next session. We'll have longer in that space to talk that, but I think the time comes up on it now. It's a bit distracting, but you can keep an eye on that. So if we talk in and about that, and again, these questions are questions that we are just almost surfacing now, but we hope might have an afterlife after this session, you know.
Just as people are coming back, it'd be great if you could share any thoughts, ideas in the chat box.
Yeah, Naomi and Dilipa, you had loads of interesting things to say, and I don't want to summarize them for you, but if you wanted to throw them up there in the chat, that would be great. No pressure though. You know?
Yeah, my concentration face was just that. I'm just typing.
All right, okay, that's it. But no pressure either, you know.
So we're really keen to hear from people about any ideas, any thoughts. Just share in the chat, or you can share. Everyone goes very quiet in Zoom. They always want to write in the chat bit, but we really would like to hear from you and get your voices there. If you're not still eating your breakfast, your lunch. What did you hear?
Aaron,
People are coming back.
Julia?
Oh yeah, I was talking with Maggie, and we started to get really excited about what we were talking about just there, which was about working with groups outdoors, but also in urban environments, and using the environment as the focus for live learning projects. So using it to inform something that might become a resource for other students who are not able to access the experience, but also using it for live learning. We just started talking about live learning and the kind of excitement and energy that comes from meeting people out in the real world and it just being inspired by the environments that you are working in.
Yeah, it's great.
So we were both, I think we were both talking about city environments, but certainly using the environment as the inspiration for the learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Eileen, you were going to say something there.
Yeah, that just resonated with me, Julia, because I don't work in education formally, but I work with social entrepreneurs who are starting all kinds of new initiatives, and we've tried some getting them outside for doing networking and whatever. But you know, I think it is that learning from other people is often the learning that we're facilitating. It's not necessarily, I mean, sometimes it's sitting down and learning about a subject, but I think I just get quite excited by bringing a group of people that don't know each other together and seeing all the things that might come out of that. And I think going forward with this, all the pandemic stuff, the outside is going to be a more accessible place maybe than sitting in a crowded room with people.
Yeah.
We were just talking a wee bit about forest schools and the way that it's kind of more acceptable, albeit there's hideous risk assessments ballooning around them, but it's much more acceptable for kids of that age it's understood that it's good for them to learn outdoors. But we were talking about our positive experiences of things like outdoor theatre and outdoor gigs, how it switches on your senses in a different way, I think, when you're outdoors. But there seems to be the sense that with adult education you have to kind of line people up and just zap learning into them in the most kind of efficient way possible, which is, you know, as I say, sort of have someone at the front kind of sort of talking at them. But so we didn't really get onto talking so much about how education could work, but certainly for networking and conversation, walking seems to work well.
Yeah. Any other thoughts people want to share?
Yeah, sure. Lisa and Kev and I were talking about the difference between learning in a classroom with potentially younger students, where maybe no matter how you set it up, it's still the teacher's domain. And so there's a kind of a set of expectations and rules about how you sit and how you behave and how you move in various activities. And that as soon as you go outside, that shifts and changes, and so it becomes a bit more of a neutral space, and so wriggling is kind of tolerated more, and that I was wondering myself if the wriggling, just not having to concentrate so much on how your physical body is, means that you can concentrate more on your brain and what you're doing, kind of thing. And so that's I've found it a benefit. I don't work in a learning environment all the time. I'm just doing very short workshops here and there. But I've found with these very, very young children that I'm working with that all of their best ideas happen when we're outside and they're doing cartwheels as we're talking about something. And you certainly can't do cartwheels inside. But yeah, outside it's perfectly acceptable to work out a maths problem while you're doing roly-polies or whatever. Yeah.
That kind of reminds me, sorry for jumping in there, Andrea. I was listening to the radio yesterday in Ireland, and in Ireland anyway, there's a lot of things coming into the curriculum in some areas about mindfulness, but I don't know about the quality of how that is done in certain spaces, to be honest, you know, kind of this learning outcomes around mindfulness and things like this. But there was a woman talking about just a garden a vegetable project that she was doing with kids, and she said, like, you know, the mindfulness comes in this outdoor activity. You know, it doesn't have to be forced, and kids don't need to know they're doing it to be mindful. And it made me think about walking as well, you know, in forest schools and bringing kids and adults out into the wild, and it happens in those spaces instead of, you know, putting them in classrooms and giving them PowerPoints on mindfulness, you know. So yeah, just kind of something you said there, Andrea, made me think about that, you know.
Well, we did actually talk about walking as a mindfulness exercise, and how is that something that disrupts the normal kind of things, or is it, if it's something that's done regularly, it might not be disrupting your teaching or learning, but it might just allow a disruption to happen at other times, because the children can get that mindfulness happening.
Just coming there, that Kyra and I both work in the same team, and we've been using sort of walking dialogues for a number of years now, and we use them within the team and with people we're working with. But just going back to Maggie's point there about paying attention, and it's very purposely structured so that each person has 15 minutes of uninterrupted time to talk while they walk. And obviously in the past we used to do that together, but now we're doing it over the phone with people as well, and just having that structure to really talk about what's kind of around for you, what's emerging, what's there, you know, and a little bit of biography too within that, to get to know another. And since then, we, you know, put it on Twitter a few times. We've got a structure which is in the tool shed for people to have a look at. But it's interesting that people have picked that up and got to know people they didn't know at all, because people say, oh, is it easier to do it with someone you know? And it doesn't really matter, but you can, that sense of, you can do it with someone you know, and you'll find out that you didn't really know them. So there's a bit about that, we find out a lot more, but just that time and space to pay attention. And there's something definitely different about it when we walk than just sitting in a Zoom room, which is great, little room, but I think there's something completely different about it if we go out for a walk with somebody, and that we think differently, and we quite often can change our perspective in terms of that. So although we're talking about education, we're using it in our work and the conversations that we need to have with people. Why would you not want to have them outside and walking if you can, in some ways?
There's also a teacher has been putting up on Twitter. She's been using the dialogue walks with her class. I think they're P6. I'm really intrigued, because they were talking to each other, but then their homework was to go and have the same conversation with their parents. I just thought that would be amazing, just to see, you know, a different way of having a conversation with your parents, because that's what they always say, if you want anything out, you know, to speak to your children, take them for a drive or walk side by side with them. Certainly get more kind of in-depth conversation with them.
We certainly, I work for a walking charity in Scotland, so walking meetings are things that we don't do much within education, but we promote walking meetings in a workplace setting, and certainly what we've been suggesting to people, and we've been doing ourselves, is rather than on the Zoom call, you go for a walk and have the meeting on the phone, so that you're both getting a bit of activity, and you know, you comment on where you're going and all the rest. So and it does help greatly in terms of the screen time that you're on, but also just feeling that you're a bit more connected with the person when you can't actually see them face to face. Somehow just hearing them while you're walking is a bit like walking beside them. So
this is like an audio call, you mean, Rona, where you're yeah. A good idea. I remember from the walk that I did at the Firestarter Festival, Karen, it was just very delicious somehow to have 15 minutes uninterrupted time. I think that was the word that came to mind, and I think particularly for people who may be more in the sort of introvert end of the scale, it was just very beneficial to have that like set box frame around the time to speak. I certainly benefited from it.
Great, thank you. I'm aware of time, and sadly, you know, we're running out, but we did ask Maggie along here to give some of her reflections, maybe to pick up on some of the comments that people have made. Are you okay to kind of respond a little bit, Maggie, to what you've heard and some of your own ideas? It'd be great to hear from you.
Sure. That's great. Can I just go back through the chat, because there are some things that I thought it'd be really great to pick up on. And I suppose the sort of first, well, if I start at the bottom, I love this idea. You know, Andrea has just added that a colleague calls it an empathy walk, and Heather's concept of the deliciousness of having that uninterrupted time. In discussion in our session with Julia, what came out of that sort of relationship that Rona is talking about is the idea of presence. You know, that when you are, I mean, actually this, I feel quite connected to everyone on this call. There's not too many, but there is something about, you know, going for a walk, and I can see how it could be possible also to do it whilst you're on the telephone with somebody, but you're in the landscape. So you have that sensory, connected, attuned experience, and are paying attention at the same time to your physical presence, you know, your embodied presence in the landscape whilst connected or tuned to somebody on the telephone. But I think a kind of key term is presence, you know, how walking enables us to be present, you know, to have presence, and how that impacts on teaching and learning as well. So, you know, and I think that notion of live, so the terms that have come up, you know, live learning, Heather mentioned the drift walks that she leads. So live learning, walking classroom, having presence, paying attention, you know, are all the ingredients, I think, for live learning or participatory learning. And also the one of the points that came up in the last set of discussions around participatory learning and sharing in that sort of, you know, more mutual learning way. So away from the hierarchical organizational structures of the classroom, you know, freed from that, together in space and place, we are connected in a much more mutually learning way. And in the conversation with Julia, you know, we agreed that for both of us, you know, it feels like we know less now than we did, you know, for me 30 years ago, when I was 30. So, you know, almost, do you know what I mean? Learning is unending, you know, the horizon is kind of ahead of you always. So I think that kind of mutual, reflective, participatory learning is a fabulous aspect of walking and the idea of the walking classroom, and the sort of transformative potential, you know, because Heather mentioned, you know, people who might be more, you know, quieter people or more introverted. So, and obviously, you know, whether they're adults or children or young people, you know, some people feel more able to speak in that kind of structural, you know, hierarchical sphere of the classroom. Whereas outside, you know, away from those power structures and in a more sort of, you know, flat subject structure, it's, you know, I think learning can be more productive. You know, kind of praxis maybe is a term that, you know, one could use, you know, purposeful learning, engaged live learning, embodied learning. And I think learning with our senses and our bodies, as well as, you know, our mind and the way our mind connects to themes and issues, is much more vibrant when walking. The examples that I gave Heather were, Julia, we're doing a postgrad induction day tomorrow, and that will be walking. So rather than just talking at them, we're going to go on a series of walks and just get to know each other that way. You know, we'll have walking sessions, walking classes. In York, when I was at York, with the students, we created a walk that students could go on at open days, but also in their their first module in criminology, to learn about kind of themes and issues of crime and justice in the city by walking that the students had created. And I think, that the creative, imaginative possibilities that are evoked through live learning in that way are so exciting. And I think I've probably talked too much.
No, that's great. Has anybody else got anything that you want to offer? I can see people writing up things, but any other thoughts about that?
I think the idea of walking a city for a particular theme, so knowing areas of a city and thinking about how a community orientates itself, where people spend time, who's distant from each other, is something that has lots and lots of different applications. So for instance, for a number of the things that I'm interested in is about access to culture and where young people believe culture is produced. So that would be another interesting way to explore a city with them. And for instance, the idea of high culture versus locally produced and personal cultures.
And have you used that? Have you worked with young people through walking in that way? To sort of disrupt some of the norms about culture.
In the early stages of planning projects like that, and there's a music project that I'm working on, and actually where we're looking at where music's produced around the city of Manchester, and where how that's quite peripheral in some instances, and how that links to genre and who's produced it.
Fabulous. It sounds wonderful.
I'm aware of time, and I wondered, Jerry, do you want to say something about the Padlet?
Yeah, I can do. Yeah, so I think as we were saying maybe at the outset, I find sometimes in spaces like these, you're kind of just getting sparked up with thoughts, and then you kind of have to leave, and you kind of, you're left with them. And I'm kind of, I think we were all interested in when we were kind of thinking about this session, is the kind of afterlife of these kind of spaces and the potential for them. So what we've done is, in some ways, if you like, all of this is just a taster, and really what we're maybe framing it as an invitation to go and walk somewhere. Everybody has kind of in the very first part there on place has been suggested somewhere to go for a walk, and in some ways we'd like you to do that. If I can just share my screen for a moment. We've created this Padlet, which is just a kind of open kind of space on the internet. Can I just share my screen here? And let me see. I'm just going to share my screen here, I think. Share. And yeah, a sec here now.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, so is that coming up?
Yeah.
Okay, it's not coming up on mine, but I can't see anything. Okay, so yeah, so we shared this. I can put the link, and basically it's those 3 questions that we had asked about place, process, and provocation, and it's just an open site, and anybody can add to it. We've kind of thrown a few comments, and you just really add to it by I don't think I can do it. Oh yeah, but just writing something in, and it stays there, in that space. And we've put a couple of examples of a few places. Me, Clonborough Woods in Galway, I like to walk. Fife for Karen. Maggie's put up a video there of feminists walking the city. I put up a podcast of something I've done with adult educators. But in some ways, again, we're trying to model a curriculum. So this, in some ways, this is an organic, non-hierarchical curriculum where it becomes what people do and share, as opposed to us, a kind of educator controlling it, or a curriculum designer controlling it. So we're going to leave that open for a while, and over a period of indeterminate time, if people go for a walk and want to share their thoughts on any of these questions, you may want to add to it. I don't know if there's a capacity to even send out an email reminder or something at some stage for people to do it. And we might come back in a few months and say, well, what's emerging for people around this? And that notion of a slowly developing organic curriculum, if you like, is what this might be around walking, and what it might be and what it might become. So it's very loosely defined, but it's that's what it is. I'll come back from that now, and I'll just put the link here that people can access it directly from that. But yeah, as I say, it's just an invitation to walk and to engage a bit deeper with some of those questions if people are keen to do that. And we might pop in and have a look at it as we go over the months, and maybe we can invite people back to see what's emerging in a few months. I don't know, you know. And
sorry, Jerry.
I just remind, when I say I don't know, it reminded, I think, what somebody was saying there about, yeah, Maggie was saying about not knowing things the longer you're around. One of my children was asking, what's an adult educator? What's the difference between an adult educator and a teacher? And I was saying, I think an adult educator, it's like a teacher, but we don't know anything, you know. That's the difference. That's the only way I could understand it. I was only being slightly facetious. Anyway, sorry, Karen. Yeah.
No, I was going to say that the link to the Padlet is also in the tool shed. And there's some great resources. Jerry's done some wonderful little biographies with people talking about walking, and little podcasts with several people on walks, and they go on the walk, and it's really lovely because you can hear the rain and all the elements as well. And so those podcasts are in there, and Maggie's written lots. I mean, she's a real expert, and just a little, because I've got her book here. I would really recommend that to you if you're interested in walking methods, research on the move. And it's Maggie O'Neill and Brian Roberts. And it's been a fantastic resource for me. And I know, Jerry, you've used it as well. So lots there that can be really helpful.
That's brilliant.
Oh, you've got your copy. I mean, thank you. So thank you to everybody. Just a couple of things to say. It just came into my mind that because mindfulness came up earlier, and Julia and I are doing an event on Thursday at 11 o'clock, and it's on the inner conditions that you need to be creatively brave. And so please, if you have the time and you want to drop in, please do. We're really excited about it. There's 4 of us just sharing a bit about our own journeys and what it means to be creatively brave, and how do you take that step forward, taking risk, and what helps in doing that. Certainly walking is one of the things. I think that do a lot of walking to work things through myself. And so that's at 11. And also on Thursday, at 7 o'clock, we have Music and Mind. And that's all about breathing and the relationship between music and breathing, and how that really supports us in the work that we do. So that's an evening thing with musicians, and talking about, and I think it was musicians who were doing walking. So there's more, we've got walking and mindful breathing. So everything that can help us with this sort of conditions to stay present and to stay in that sense of attention to what is happening, but to ourselves and the connection with others. So that's 11 o'clock on Thursday for our inner creative bravery, and 7 o'clock for music. And have a look at those they're both in the Discovery tent on the website. So hopefully you've all managed to navigate your way around the field, through the mud, and find all the resources. And all the resources for walking will be in the tool shed. So thank you so much. Thank you to Maggie and to Jerry for co-hosting and joining today. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you all for coming along to the festival, and hope to see you at lots of other events.